Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right, we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
Man, happy June.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Happy Easter for a second. I was going to be like,
Happy
where are
Easter.
we? Happy Easter. We're like Frosty the Snowman, except we only know the wrong holidays. Which I guess Frosty the Snowman also only knows the wrong holidays because he always says happy birthday.
Which isn't a holiday, unless he was Jesus.
No, it could be a holiday for him, and it could be his birthday every time they put a hat on him. But then that also implies that he dies when you take the hat off.
I thought that's canon.
Which means the Iron Brew Frosty also dies when you take its Iron Brew away.
I mean, that's definitely canon.
But yeah, so happy Sunday. Did you have a fun week?
Yeah, I did. What about you, Seth?
Yeah, it was good. I played some games, I cleaned the studio, and then I made a mess in the studio.
Oh, that explains why it doesn't look any different.
Yeah, no. It's just a different mess. I have been thinking about going to the upcoming show that we're going to be going to, Too Many Games.
Yeah.
I think we may do an episode on Too Many Games. We may do a pre-episode, we may do a post-episode, we may do two, we may do one. Really depends on how we're feeling. You'll at least get one episode dedicated to the show, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the show in case we don't do a pre-episode. And that's there's a show, it's a convention. It's called Too Many Games. It's a pretty large video game convention. It's probably going to be smaller than PAX, but larger than Retro World.
Yeah, it's probably an in-between.
A little mid-sized con.
I don't know if it has they have a lot of guests and stuff, but they don't have like a panel schedule out yet that I've seen. I assume there's panels.
There's got to be a dealer's
There's
room.
there's definitely dealers. I think like the whole thing's dealers. So
that's what we like to do. We like to shop. Well, I like to browse, and Zach likes to actually shop. I don't actually buy anything.
Unless it's like old school Dungeons and Dragons stuff.
Yeah, which if they have some, I might buy some.
There's a large board game presence apparently at this convention.
I think the best part about this trip is that Zach and I are going to be driving there, and we don't live in Pennsylvania, and we don't live arguably anywhere close to Pennsylvania.
It's one of the designated times that we're allowed out of the studio.
And we're going to drive as far as possible.
Yeah, we have to wear a distance monitor. We can't go too far.
Yeah, or else producer Doug blows us up. But we'll be having an exciting car ride. That's going to be 5.5 hours where Zach and I will be in a car alone, and perhaps only one of us will make it.
I, in fact, will be screaming at least 4 of those hours.
Yeah, well, I don't generally pay attention when I drive anyway.
I don't know if I'll be screaming in a row. I might scream like for an hour, then take a break, then scream.
Perfect. Maybe we'll think about some more episodes while we're driving because we'll have plenty of time to think.
We can record an episode while we're driving.
We could probably record a few episodes while we're driving. Do you have a charger for your mic?
I mean, it's a USB. I just plug it into a USB
perfect.
thing.
You can plug it right into the car. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. The worst part about long car rides is inevitably you have to return, and the return car ride is going to be on a Sunday, and I should really take Monday off. Well, I guess if we leave early, we'll be back. So look forward to at least one more episode where we talk about Too Many Games. But Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing Terminator Salvation, which is an arcade game that came out in 2010 from Polyphony Digital. I was playing it at Versus, the barcade in Boston. I went to Versus a few weeks ago with my friends because one of my friends was visiting from Chicago. So we decided that we were going to take him out for drinks, and we went to Versus. And for those who don't know or haven't listened to our show before, Versus is a barcade in Boston that Seth and I usually visit during PAX. It is a pretty fun barcade. You get alcohol and you can play classic video games. It has a $5 cover charge, so when you enter, you give the man at the door $5 and you can play any game you want for the rest of the night. And it's pretty fun. Now, because it wasn't PAX, it was actually manageable to be there. When Seth and I go during PAX, usually it is like packed wall-to-wall people because PAX brings out all the gamers. But on a Saturday night in May in Boston, not a lot of nerds walking around. So it was mostly just us and a couple of people kind of trickled in throughout the evening. But we had a good time, and we played a lot of Terminator Salvation, which is a light gun gun on-rail shooter based on the movie of the same name. It came out in 2010. It's a pretty fun, standard light gun game, a very modern light gun game. All the graphics are kind of 3D and stuff. And the gun you use is this, it kind of looks like, almost like an AR-15, but obviously like multicolor because it can't look like a real gun. And it's kind of like Time Crisis, except you're playing against Terminators. What's really fun, though, is because the game is co-op, you can play with your friends. However, the plot doesn't adjust if you're in co-op. So you're both just playing as John Connor, which is, in my opinion, hilarious because it implies that John Connor not only is ambidextrous and can shoot in different directions at the same time, but he also can multitask and focus on different robots at the same time. John Connor is truly the man of the future. What also is fun is the controller, the gun you use to reload. It's the standard point away from the screen and press fire, but there's another way to reload, and that is to smack the bottom of the magazine, and that kind of adds a little bit of I don't want to call it realism, but it definitely adds a bit of fluidity to the game to like, see you're out of ammo, smack it, and keep going. But yeah, fun game. I had a good time playing it. We kind of played it so that we traded off, as there was kind of a group of us, so there was like 4 or 5 of us, and when 2 of us would die, we would hand it to the next players and kind of go from there. And what's nice is because it's free play, we weren't pumping in quarters into it, so whenever we died, we just smacked the respawn button and kept going. But yeah, that's Terminator Salvation. Came out in 2010, and it's a pretty solid arcade game.
That sounds like fun. Did you beat it?
Yeah, we did. We went through the whole game.
And it was free play, so you didn't spend money. Unlike the time that my friend and I at Universal Studios played through the entirety of the Halo arcade game, and that cost us around $40. But I was not recently playing it. In fact, I was recently playing Xenonauts 2, which is being developed by Goldhawk Interactive and is still in early access and was released to early access back in July of 18th in 2023. It's the sequel to Xenonauts 1 and is kind of like the spiritual successor to XCOM if they wanted to make XCOM more XCOM-y than what they did with the reboot of the Firaxis XCOM game. Anyway, if you liked the version of XCOM, the original XCOM, and you wanted the spreadsheet crunching, base building, complicated time units management style of gameplay, and you're missing that in the Firaxis game, well, just get Xenonauts 2. It's very close to how the original XCOM, if they took the original XCOM and just made it in a newer engine versus remastering and reimagining it when they did with the XCOM for the Firaxis games. One thing that I really enjoyed playing with in Xenonauts 2, one of the first missions is you have to go back to a base that you have to leave to go and recover items. And I had a series of troopers. So you have like in Xenonauts, you just have a pile of them versus like having like an elite 6, I think, or 8 in XCOM. In Xenonauts, you have like 12 minimally, 9. You have 9, right? And I think in the Firaxis XCOM game, you have like 6. So you have 3 more than what you have in the Firaxis game. So it just feels like you have a lot. Your original loadout and my loadout that I was using had a heavy weapons person, a sniper, a bunch of riflemen, a grenader, and a couple of assault people with shotguns. Oh, and a shield. I had somebody just trucking around a shield. That was their power, was that they had, like, that was their loadout, was just a massive shield and a pistol. And so what I did in the first level was I ran my shield person and I stuck them in a corner, because if the alien came in, they would have to shoot at the shield. And then I hid some people with rifles behind crates. And then I just ended my turn until they came into the room. And I just continued to end my turn because it's like all these different vault doors. And to go through the door, you have to like spend a couple time units opening the door. Then you have to proceed through the door. You have to look around the door. All this takes time units. So like entering a room, you're at a disadvantage. But if you stay in a room and don't hold your action, you can use your time units on the enemy's turn to shoot. So I just put my person who's got a big shield out in the middle of the room and said, we'll just wait. Eventually the aliens will come in here and then we'll shoot them. And that strategy worked out pretty well. Yeah, Xenonauts 2 is definitely got a lot going for it in regards to being very XCOM-y. The graphics are a little more simple compared to the graphics of, say, the Firaxis XCOM game, and definitely feels more like more of that like drawn pseudo 3D look to it, and like the troopers actually look like paper dolls when you're like putting on their equipment and stuff. So it's very cool, very nostalgic feeling. I really enjoyed it, and will continue to play Xenonauts 2. I'm really glad that I picked it up. It was on sale for like 20% off or something. It was on my wish list for a while, so I decided I gotta stop wishing for things and I just gotta start buying things, because it's just gonna sit on my wish list. And honestly, if it's on my wish list and it's on sale for 20 or 30 or 40% off and I'm not buying it, I don't really wish for it. So I'm trying to be more cognizant about that. So I was like, yeah, Xenonauts 2, I've been waiting, I've been eyeing, and so I just pulled the trigger on it, played probably about an hour or two of it, and I've been really digging it.
Nice. That sounds fun. I've heard good things about Xenonauts too, so I'm glad that you like it. Well, getting into today's episode, we're doing kind of a follow-up to an episode we already did. We did an episode not too long ago about Sonic games on the Famicom, where we talked about bootleg Sonic games that were brought over to the Famicom and Super Famicom. And in many ways, this episode is a sequel to that episode, because we're talking about Mario games on the Genesis. So we talked about Sonic on Nintendo. What about our boy Mario? Mario has his own life in terms of bootleg games, especially on the Famicom. There are tons of bootleg Famicom games featuring Mario, be it games like Super Mario 14, which was Kid Nicky 3, or Granddad 7, which is a Flintstones game, or McMario, which is McKids. However, Mario's also crossed over to the Genesis, thanks to our bootleg friends. And we're going to talk about a handful of them in today's episode, and they're all very different from each other. And I'm going to be totally honest with you. I'm a fan of bootleg games. I love bootleg games. I'm a bootleg game defender. None of these games are good, so get ready for some pretty bad games. Though I think the first one might be the best. The first one is just called Super Mario World. It could also be called Super Mario Brothers. The title is different in the game. So when you start the game, it will say Super Mario World, and then when you press start, it goes to another screen that says Super Mario Bros. So what's the name of the game? It's whatever you want it to be. But Super Mario World is not the one for the Super Nintendo. This is a Sega Genesis game that is a hack of a game called Squirrel King, which was created by a company called Gamtech. Now, Gamtech was founded in Taichung, Taiwan, back in 1989. In its earliest days, they self-published games for the Famicom and Sega Genesis. In fact, one of their earliest games was a pack-in title for the Dynacom Megavision, a clone console that was released in Brazil. And this game, Bomb Boy, was basically a Bomberman clone, complete in terms of like down to the gameplay. The only difference is the graphics are a little different. They also would release a game called The Legend of Wukong, which was based on the novel Journey to the West in 1996. And Legend of Wukong was later re-released worldwide in 2008 by a company called Super Fighter Team, who has been involved in bringing over some of Gamtech's games in worldwide releases, kind of going into those games and translating them and making them available for people who didn't grow up in Taiwan in the 1990s. Gamtech would also get into the world of putting out bootleg titles. Specifically, they released a game called Super Bubble Bobble MD or Mega Drive, and they also released a game called Tiny Toon Adventures 3, which featured the Tiny Toons IP. So Gamtech wasn't unfamiliar with dabbling in the world of copyright infringement. Squirrel King would be a game that they put out, which in 1995 was released for the Genesis and Super Nintendo. The game is based loosely on Rescue Rangers, the game for the NES, primarily in the sense that you're playing as characters who look identical to Chip and Dale from Rescue Rangers, and you pick up boxes and you throw them at enemies, which you do in the Rescue Rangers games.
Right, but this time you're Squirrel Kings.
This time you're Squirrel Kings, yes. In all honesty, Squirrel King is a very competent game. It has nice colorful sprites, has some pretty catchy music, which we'll put here. and also some enjoyable gameplay, at least until you get to the later levels, and then it starts to kind of drag on a bit because it's repetitive gameplay. I think that's where Squirrel King has a problem. The game is okay, it's just repetitive. In 1996, a company called Chwampu would hack Squirrel King and put Mario in it. This version of the game is very interesting. The first few stages are obviously inspired by Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, or as you might also know it, Super Mario Bros. 2 Japan. But there's a twist. Instead of stomping on Koopas, you pick up boxes and you throw them at Koopas. You also have the ability to shoot a fireball if you collect a green fist, which I guess means fire. I don't know. It's just you collect a green fist and you shoot a fireball. You also don't collect coins, you collect gems. And if you get hit by an enemy, you don't lose like your size, you lose hearts, and you have to pick up health packs in order to gain those hearts back. When you get to the boss stage of the first few levels, you encounter Bowser, who runs back and forth, and you have to hit him with boxes or shoot him with your fist flame. And you shoot him like 15 times. It's ridiculous. It sounds easy enough, but there is a pattern that will change up a bit and can throw you off, so the boss does have a bit of challenge to it. Once you beat Bowser, the Mario facade basically drops, and you just go to the Squirrel King stages with Mario this time. So it's all the Squirrel King levels with the Squirrel King music. No more Mario music. You're just playing as Mario in these Squirrel King levels. So they really only did the first 4 levels in the boss, and then they were like, whatever. We're dropping this facade. No one's going to get farther than the boss. And and that's Super Mario Brothers / Super Mario World by Chwampu, who really just took Squirrel King and slapped Mario on it.
So what you're telling me is Squirrel King is a bootleg of Rescue Rangers?
Yep.
So Super Mario World / Brothers, a bootleg of Squirrel King, which is just Mario as the king of the squirrels, who is just Rescue Rangers?
Yes.
So in the Disney Cinematic Universe combined with the Nintendo Cinematic Universe, Mario is in the same world as Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers.
That's right. And also, if we're going by cinematic universes, the recent Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers movie has ugly Sonic. So that means Sonic is also in this cinematic universe.
Perfect. What a great world. Now, a few years later in 1998, GameTech would release another game they called Super Mario Bros. 2, which despite the name is a port of the first Super Mario Bros. To the Genesis. They didn't want people to be confused with their otherwise confusing name of Super Mario Bros., the Mario Bros. Squirrel King bootleg ripoff of Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers.
Right.
So that's why they put a 2 after the end, so then you know it's a different game, but it is in fact the first game that is the first Mario game. The graphics are directly lifted from the SNES Super Mario All-Stars game, and GameTech would go on to rebuild the Mario engine effectively from scratch, which means that the game doesn't run as good as the original NES version. Mario's a bit too fast when he's running because the Sega Genesis is a faster system, and because he's too fast when he's running, it makes him harder to control, and it takes a bit for him to catch up to speed when going from walk to a run, which can be disorienting if you're used to the more fluid controls of the original game, because it's like just taking a NES game that ran at a very specific pace and making it faster.
Yeah.
Now, despite this, the game is still basically completely intact and there. You can, as long as you can deal with various bugs, you can play through the Super Mario Brothers first game on the Sega Genesis, which is really cool.
Yeah, it is.
That same year, in 1998, GameTech would also put out a version called Sonic Jam 6, which features Sonic instead of Mario in the game.
Yes.
Of Super Mario Brothers. It is 100% the same game, which is, once again, Super Mario Brothers on the Sega Genesis. But instead of Mario, it's Sonic. And he starts out red, and when you collect a fire flower, he turns blue. A fun glitch that can occur in an emulated version of the game, in the event that you want to emulate this thing, in Game World 4.1, when the Lakitu shows up, Lakitu will throw a spiky at you, and infinite spikies will spawn, causing the game to crash instantly. This doesn't happen on real hardware. It only happens on emulation. So if you want to emulate Sonic Jam 6, which I don't know who wants to do that. It's probably just Zach, and not even that. He has it on real hardware. So if you want to emulate Sonic Jam 6, there is the possibility of a glitch. Does it always occur?
It happens in specific emulators, but it's all the emulators that people use, like Gens and Fusion. It happens in. I don't think it happens in like Blastum, which is considered a more accurate emulator.
So yeah, unfortunately, this game you can essentially soft lock it out because an infinite spikies is impossible to defeat. Now, no other Sonic changes have been made, so Sonic will still have to fight Goombas, Koopas, Bowsers, and save Princess Peach because, that's not weird. Now, going back a few years to 1996, another port came out, also possibly by GameTech, though it's not entirely sure who the creator is. The game was called Super Mario World 64. Now, this is a port of Super Mario World, and the game starts with a really clear voice line for Mario that is directly lifted from the Super Mario 64 game. It's me, Mario! Which is probably the best part of the game, because the rest of it is bad. It's just not worthwhile. The game is nice looking. You could probably convince somebody that it is legitimately Super Mario World if you showed a person a screenshot. The game itself is rather a poor port, with music being badly ported over. The physics being completely botched, and a variety of changes that made the game very difficult. However, it's still pretty short with only 7 levels. The second to last level is a maze that is timed, and the 7th level is the final boss. The boss isn't Bowser, but rather a giant black sphere that kind of looks like a chain chomp. The music in the game changes around from a poor rendition of Super Mario World's music to stolen songs from Tailspin, Jeopardy, and Zach and I's favorite game, Gary Kitchen Super Battle Tank. Because if you're going to steal songs from games, Jerry's Kitchen Super Battle Tank, top of my list. Now, it is an ambitious port overall, but an ambitious port that did not carry through with their mission.
Yeah, it's wild. One of my favorite details, if I remember correctly, is the timer in the maze last level carries into the boss fight. So you can literally start the boss fight with like 5 seconds left if you're really bad at the maze.
And thus auto losing.
Yeah. I mean, you will respawn in the boss if you have enough lives, but if it's game over for you, it's game over. You know
what my favorite part of games is? Getting soft locked out of things.
I love it. It's so good. Speaking of pretty poor games, the last 2 games are very similar to each other, and they are both surprisingly not good. These don't come from our friends at GameTech, and actually they don't even come from Taiwan or China. These are coming from Russia, specifically a Russian developer called VMV, stylized as BMB in Cyrillic. The first of this duology, I would call it, is Mario 3 Around the World, released around 2011. You heard me right. Russian companies were putting out Sega games in 2011. Despite the name Mario 3, it's not a port. Rather, it's its own original game / own original story. Per the back of the box, the game reads, in the new game, the famous plumber Mario will have to once again overcome all the difficulties and machinations of his enemies in order to save Princess Peach, captured by the evil Wario and his minions. Your task is to help Mario and save the princess. There are new adventures ahead, new and old friends, and new abilities of the main character. That last sentence has some falsities in it. While yes, there might be new adventures ahead, I do not believe there are any new friends, and I don't believe there is any new abilities. You have new adventures and stolen enemies from other games, but that's the way it is. Now, to accomplish this task of saving Princess Peach, you have to travel around the world, hence why the game is called Mario 3 Around the World. There are 22 levels, in fact, with 11 being Egyptian themed, 6 being Aztec themed, and 5 being Arctic themed. The graphics in the game are all stolen from various Mario games, with Mario's main sprite being taken from the Super Famicom game Mario and Wario. The music in the game and its sequel is really good, but that's because it's also stolen. Per the Bootleg Games wiki, a majority of the music actually comes from modules that come with the music making tool TFM Music Maker. So someone literally went into the Music Maker tool and just stole sample music that was already created and dropped it into their Mario game. Some of the music is also stolen from a homebrew game called Uwal Quest for Money, and also the music is randomized. So when you start the game, the music isn't always the same song, which is interesting because that's not usually how games work, but it certainly makes the game different every time you play it. Mario 3 Around the World also features a pretty infamous game over screen. When you get a game over, you'll get a graphic of a piranha plant with bloody teeth facing Mario's hat with blood around it, implying that the piranha plant has eaten Mario. The art is actually, surprisingly, stolen from an artist named Bibbs, and the original art piece is called Dead Mario.
Now, a sequel to this game, Mario 4 Space Odyssey, was also released around 2011 and features basically the same gameplay as Mario 3 Around the World. It does have a unique plot, which, per the back of the box, reads, "The greatest hero goes into space." During the Star Festival, when star stones fall throughout the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario and Luigi observed the stars in the night sky. Suddenly, their attention was drawn to a star falling behind Mushroom Hill. When she was out of sight, friends went in search. At the sight of the star's fall, they discovered a spaceship. The creature that was in it said that a threat loomed over their galaxy that only Mario could prevent. If he doesn't stop the Galactic Conqueror and his huge army, the entire Mushroom Kingdom will be doomed. Unlike Mario 3, there are only 16 levels. The levels are also fairly similar in the style to Mario 3, but with more spacey themed style of levels. There's also a shop that can be accessed, which allows you to buy some power-ups. Also, like Mario 3, it features a ton of stolen assets and music, with graphics being taken from Super Mario All-Star, Super Mario Bros., New Super Mario Bros., and so on. Both games have a ton of glitches, which emulators often have trouble with things like the shop. On real hardware, the game can occasionally hardlock when Mario hits a brick, causing the game to freeze and the music to freeze on a tone that gets exponentially louder, which is always something that you want your games to do.
I also like that it happens when Mario hits a brick, something Mario is very known for doing.
Only once or twice per level. The game over screen for Mario 4 Space Odyssey is equally as disturbing as Mario 3's bloody piranha plant. You'll get a screen of a skull wearing Mario's hat, and then when it goes to the continue screen, you'll see a dead Mario with a piranha plant bursting from his chest and a squid enemy on his face. The skull was drawn by artist Dan Matthews and is titled Original Gamer, and the Mario with the piranha plant bursting from his chest is called Game Over by artist Aaron Williams. And with that, that's all the bootleg Mario games that were released on the Genesis. There was also a homebrewed port of the original NES Super Mario Bros. That did a way better job than GameTech's version, but that was done as a hobbyist project and wasn't intended to be an actual bootleg project, meaning they did that for fun and weren't intending to make money off of people who were confused. Pirated copies do crop up on places like AliExpress and eBay of the homebrew port of the original NES game. All of the games we talked about did get physical releases for the Genesis at some point, and are definitely worth tracking down if you want to experience Mario in a way that no one ever wanted to experience Mario in, and that's it. These are just more of like warnings. Don't go after these games unless you're Zach and you're weird.
Yeah, no, they're mostly novelties, in my opinion, especially the ones from Russia, but they're neat. I mean, I think I find games like Somari to be more interesting when you take a game that is significantly more advanced than the console it is being ported to. So like with Somari from Hummer Team or Hummer Team's Aladdin or even Hummer Team's Super Mario World, they did something that's kind of impressive, right? They took a game for a 16-bit console and they downgraded it to a playable state with flaws, but to a playable state on a console that is significantly less powerful. What GameTech did is they just made a bad version of Super Mario Brothers on the Genesis. Like, I don't know if like that an attempt was obviously made, but their motives were probably more in line with wanting to sell something versus a kind of I don't know. They definitely were more in line with wanting to make something that could be easily mistaken, sort of deal. Now, getting into our retro rewind for today, Seth had me play Spider-Man in the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge for the Game Gear. Released in 1992 by Software Creations for a variety of consoles, including the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Gear, and there was also a version on the Game Boy by Unexpected Development. We had the Genesis version growing up, and it's very similar to the Game Gear version. When I was playing the Game Gear version, I was like, yes, I remember this level and I remember this game. In my opinion, they're equally bad. It's not a good game. You start off the game playing as Spider-Man, though later on you can play as Cyclops, Wolverine, Storm, and Gambit. The plot of the game has to do with Arcade, a villain from the X-Men who captures the X-Men and does what he does with them. He shoves them into an arcade, which is what he does. So you play as Spider-Man, and your job is to initially save the X-Men and then team up with the X-Men to defeat Arcade. In the Spider-Man level, you crawl around and you have to disable security cameras, I guess. That's kind of like what you're doing. But the platforming is so incredibly frustrating. For one thing, Spider-Man jumps very high, but he doesn't jump very well. So he will jump high, but it's hard to coordinate him onto things. Another thing is that the graphics in the game, at least on the Game Gear version, a little hard to differentiate what is supposed to be a platform and what is just supposed to be the background. So I kept falling and thinking I was going to land on a platform, and instead passing through the object that was appearing like a platform because it was just background object. Also, you encounter robots, which you have to shoot with web and they explode, but they're really annoying robots. Sometimes they seem to only shoot you when you're directly in their range, which I guess makes sense, but you get hit pretty much every time you're in front of one, and it's really hard to coordinate it so that you don't get hit when you're trying to attack them. Overall, it's a frustrating game. It's not very good. I don't think it holds up. But next week, Seth, I want you to play a game called Zombie Nation for the NES.
Great. Looking forward to it. Now, Zach had me play The Incredible Hulk for the SNES. This was developed by Probe Software and released back in 1994 for the Sega Genesis and the SNES. It's a 2D action platformer game with a beat-em-up, with really kind of beat-em-up type of gameplay where you're playing as Hulk, jumping around, punching people. Hulk punches, he jabs, he thunderclaps, and he pile drives. Robots. Pretty much robots through the entire game. There are some comic book villains that he beats up, like rhinos in the game, but primarily it's robots. That's the most of the bad guys that you're fighting. And there's a reason for it, and that reason makes the game even sadder. Hulk in the game seems a bit weak. The enemies that you fight are not very unique, especially the trash mobs that you fight throughout the game, and the setting of the game seems pretty generic. In fact, the entire game feels just generic. And if you take Hulk out of the game and you put someone random in the game, it wouldn't really play much differently. And that's a problem since it's a Hulk game. There is actually, I did some reading after playing the game, and it sounds like they original developers really wanted to make it super violent, have Hulk jump mile-long leaps and just utterly trash and kill people. And Marvel said, no, please do not kill people. That's not what we want to happen. And then when the reviews came out, people were like, why doesn't Hulk just kill people? And they were critical against the game because Hulk didn't just go off and kill people. The game is not a great 16-bit rendition of a Hulk game. It's really just a generic game that if nobody ever played again, I don't think that they're going to be missing out on anything. But yeah, it's just a generic Hulk game. There are better Hulk games, but surprisingly there's not a lot of better Hulk games. I feel like Hulk has gotten a short end of the stick when it came to video games. Now next week, Zach, you could play, speaking of licensed game, X-Men for the Sega Genesis.
Okay, I will. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you have any thoughts about Mario appearing on the Sega Genesis, let us know. You can email classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. You can also contact us through our website or our social media channels. Facebook, Classic Gaming Brothers, Instagram, Classic Gaming Brothers, X, CG Brothers Pod, or Blue Sky, CG Brothers Pod. We're also available on Threads as Classic Gaming Brothers. If you want to listen to our episodes, we're available on Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio, really anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. Also, you can listen to us on our website, classicgamingbrothers.com. As we mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be at Too Many Games, so you'll probably hear us mention it a few more times before the actual event. But if you're going to be at Too Many Games, let us know. We'll be glad to meet up with you. Who knows? Maybe you'll get a special treat, and that special treat is a pin, because we have a bunch of pins. With that, thank you again, everyone. And Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's
right.
That's right.